They say home is where the heart is. But for me, coming home felt more like a battlefield than any place I'd been deployed to. I sat in the driver's seat of my black government-issued SUV, its engine humming low, parked just beside the aging blue minivan my mother had refused to replace. The house looked exactly the same. Cracked steps, faded siding, overgrown hedges. Nothing had changed, not even the feeling that awaited me inside. That suffocating mix of being invisible and hyper-analyzed, of trying to shrink and scream at the same time. The porch light cast a pale amber glow across the chipped welcome mat. I stared at it for a moment. I used to imagine that light meant something warm waited behind the door. Not anymore. I rang the bell anyway. "It's open," came my mother's voice from somewhere in the kitchen. She didn't come to greet me. Of course she didn't. I stepped inside and was hit with the same smell. Floral air freshener masking old resentment. The walls were still lined with photographs. Logan's graduation, Logan's wedding, Logan's kids. Not one of me in uniform. Not even the commissioning portrait I'd mailed 5 years ago. "Dinner's almost ready," my mother said, barely looking up. "Logan and Mariel are on their way. Logan just got another promotion. You'll never believe it." I smiled. That polite, empty smile I'd perfected during briefings with foreign diplomats. "That's great, Mom." She went on about how he was leading the systems integration team at Westbridge Technologies. The pride in her voice poured thick into every word. "Everyone says he's going places," she beamed. That phrase used to crush me. Going places. Like it was some high-speed train I'd missed the second I chose the Army over business school. Now it just sounded like noise. The table was set. Of course, Logan would sit at the head. Dad would take his usual place to the right. Mom between them. And me? Somewhere at the periphery, like always. They arrived on time. Logan looked exactly how I remembered. Polished, relaxed, slightly smug. The kind of blazer that said corporate alpha male without trying too hard. He hugged me like I was a distant cousin at a wedding. "Hey, Jules. Long time." 5 years, I said. He blinked, unsure if I was joking. I wasn't. We sat, we ate. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, side salad. Identical to the meals we'd had when I was 15. Logan took over the room like he always did, walking everyone through his latest triumphs at work. He was charming, confident. Dad's eyes glistened with pride. My mother hung on to every word. Then came the moment I knew would arrive. "And you?" my mom asked, polite as a secretary at a dentist's office. "Still moving around with the Army?" I sipped my water. "More or less." Dad didn't look up from his plate. "Still a captain?" "Something like that." Logan chimed in with a chuckle. "Must be tough. No long-term strategy, right? Just following orders all the time." I didn't respond. I didn't have to. The uniform, pressed, adorned, sacred, was folded in the back of my suitcase upstairs. The silver eagle insignia gleamed beneath soft layers of cotton. Colonel, at 30. But for tonight, they didn't deserve to know. Let them talk over me one last time. Upstairs, my old room was a time capsule of a girl they used to believe in. Honor roll certificates, basketball trophies, college acceptance letters. Everything before the moment I joined ROTC. After that, nothing. I became a ghost they fed with silence. I traced my hand across the quilt my grandmother had sewn. My fingers paused over a faded patch shaped like a star. "You were always meant for more," Dad had once said. He didn't mean what I'd become. He meant an MBA, a corner office, a desk under his wing at Westbridge. What he meant was Logan. When Logan stepped into that mold, the family narrative was complete. I wasn't the daughter who chose a different path. I was the daughter who wasted hers. That night, the laughter downstairs echoed up like smoke through old floorboards. Logan's booming voice. my father's deep chuckle, the sound of a tribe united around its chosen one. They didn't know that tomorrow, at precisely 900 hours, I would walk into their boardroom wearing the uniform they refused to acknowledge. That I would brief their entire executive board as the Pentagon liaison for Project Sentinel. That I held final approval over the very contract Logan bragged about at dinner. No, tonight I was still the disappointing daughter. Tomorrow I'd be the voice they couldn't talk over. I opened my suitcase. Midnight blue pressed to perfection. The ribbons glistened. My hands moved with ritualistic precision. There was no room for anger, only readiness. Because tomorrow I wasn't going in for revenge. I was going in for truth. And truth doesn't need to yell to be heard. Morning came dressed in steel. The sky was overcast, cold light pouring through my hotel window as I adjusted the seams of my uniform with the same reverence I'd learned as a cadet. I didn't eat. My nerves didn't allow it, but my hands were steady, trained. The mirror showed a woman sharpened by deployment, by discipline, by decades packed into a decade. I looked at her and thought, let them try to diminish this. I arrived at Westbridge Technologies 15 minutes early, parking cleanly in the designated military liaison spot. The building's glass panels caught the clouds above and reflected back a gray silence I welcomed. I stepped out in full dress, deep navy blue, metals aligned, silver eagles polished to a glare. As I walked past security, heads turned. Not out of disrespect, out of attention. "Good morning, Colonel," the guard said, scanning my badge. His voice held weight, deference that had been absent at the dinner table just hours earlier. I rode the elevator up alone. 10 floors in silence. I had studied every schematic of this building, every name on the attendance list. There would be no room for error, no room for them to deny who I was. When the doors opened, the first face I saw was Logan's. He stood with his tablet near the window, relaxed, confident, until he saw me. "Juliet, why are you... What is that?" His voice cracked, eyes on the insignia. I didn't slow down. "Good morning, Mr. Dane. I'm here for the project review." Behind him, our father's voice echoed, a sound that had always meant authority. I turned and there he was, flanked by 2 suits mid-conversation. His gaze caught me. Froze. "Juliet, what the hell is going on? Why are you dressed like that?" Before I could respond, a presence rounded the corner. Lorraine Hart, CEO of Westbridge. Her pace slowed when she saw me, and then, to my father's growing confusion, her face lit up. "Colonel Dane," she said warmly, offering her hand. "Didn't realize you'd be attending in person. What a pleasure." I took her hand. I thought it would be useful to observe today's session directly. "Absolutely. You elevate the room just by being here." She smiled, then turned to the gathering audience. "For those unaware," she continued, "this is Colonel Juliet Dane, our Pentagon liaison for Project Sentinel. She has final approval authority over all military integrations." There it was. Truth. The hallway fell into an almost sacred silence. My father looked like he'd been struck. Logan's lips parted, but no sound emerged. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. We stepped into the conference room. My name was already on a placard beside Lorraine's. I took my seat at the head of the table. The briefing started with routine formalities. Lorraine introduced me again to the team. Project leads, engineers, directors, all of whom approached me now with polite professionalism, as if the insignia on my chest translated a language they had never cared to learn. No one asked if I was Logan's sister. No one asked if I'd ever thought about coming home. They addressed me as they should, Colonel Dane. I spoke firmly, clearly, outlining current milestones and key performance gaps. I wasn't just present, I was in command. Every word I said landed. Then it was Logan's turn. He stood slowly, visibly shaken, holding his tablet like a shield. As systems integration lead, he began, I've developed a Phase 2 rollout strategy I believe aligns with our performance targets. He trailed off. I let the silence hang. Mr. Dane, I said, calm but clinical, could you clarify how your proposal accounts for the latency thresholds defined in the Pentagon's last communication? He blinked. I can revisit that section. You'll need to, I said. Our benchmarks are non-negotiable. Please revise the protocol draft and resubmit it by Thursday. Close of business. He nodded. Yes, ma'am. No sarcasm, no comeback, just acknowledgement. I moved to the next agenda item as if nothing had happened, but everything had. After the meeting, people lingered in the hallway, some murmuring, most watching. Not with curiosity, with respect. Logan and my father waited in the shadows near the glass conference room wall. I could feel the heat rising off them, the shock, the embarrassment, the humiliation they didn't know how to name. My father looked like a man who had walked into a room expecting a standing ovation and instead got cross-examined. Juliet, he said once we were alone. His voice was hoarse, stripped of its usual edge. We need to talk. I nodded once. Your office. Inside, my mother was already there, hands folded tightly on her lap. Logan stood by the window like he might jump. I didn't sit. I stood at parade rest, palms clasped behind my back, spine aligned, calm, unshaken. How long have you been a colonel? My father asked. 6 months. He repeated it. 6 months. And you didn't tell us? I did, I said evenly. I sent emails, voicemails, invites to my promotion ceremony. You just never responded. My mother's eyes widened. We didn't know what it meant. Colonel sounds important, but we didn't understand. You never asked, I replied. Every time I called, it was about Logan's new project, or your company's stock price. You never asked about me unless it was to tell me to quit. We thought you were stuck, Logan said quietly, still looking at the sky. Always moving around, base to base, no roots. You called me someone who just follows orders, I said, turning to him. You laughed while saying it. I didn't know, he began. You didn't ask. My mother began to cry, quietly. We should have been there. Your commissioning, your graduation. I thought you were pushing us away. No, I said, my voice softer now. I just stopped hoping you'd show up. Silence stretched between us like a chasm, and for the first time, no one tried to fill it. I didn't expect an apology that day. I didn't even want one. Not really. What I wanted, what I had always wanted, was something much quieter, far more sacred. To be seen. To be known. After the silence in that office melted into stunned reflection, my father cleared his throat. So, what do you want now, Juliet? Recognition? A feature in the company newsletter? An apology? I studied him, his narrowed eyes, the stiff way he sat like he was bracing for an explosion. But there was no explosion left in me. Just resolve. I don't want a headline, I said. I want what I've always deserved. Respect. Not for being who you wanted me to be, but for who I became. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then, unexpectedly, Logan stepped forward. You were fair today, he said. During the meeting, you didn't humiliate me. I wasn't there too, I replied. I was doing my job. His gaze shifted. Something softened. It was impressive, he said. You were commanding. It was the first genuine compliment I'd ever heard from him. I didn't say thank you. I didn't need to. The moment held its own weight. My father stood then, not out of anger, but out of something heavier, something approaching humility. He extended his hand toward me, and it didn't feel like a test. It felt like a gesture I had seen in countless ceremonies, a silent offering of earned respect. Colonel Dane, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I owe you an apology. I underestimated you. Completely. I took his hand, steady, no bitterness. I accept, I said. My mother blinked back tears, then rose slowly. We'd like to try again. If you'll let us. I looked at her, then at both of them. One step at a time. And for the first time in years, I believed we actually might. 6 months later, the apartment I'd made my own in Washington, D.C., felt like a reflection of everything I'd fought for. The walls were clean, the shelves lined with books and discreet medals, the space filled not with noise but with earned calm. That evening, my family came over for dinner. It wasn't a grand reunion. It didn't need to be. My father arrived first, holding a framed copy of an article I'd nearly forgotten about, a Defense Journal feature on Project Sentinel. In the center was a photo of me, in uniform, standing beside General Armstrong and Lorraine Hart. Thought you might want a copy, he said. Been hanging in my office for a few months now. He handed it to me carefully, like it might break. Thanks, Dad, I said genuinely. It means something. My mother came next, carrying a warm pie tin with both hands like it was an offering at a fragile altar. Apple, she said with an awkward smile. Still your favorite, right? It is. She looked around the apartment. So clean. So organized. I almost joked, military habit, but caught myself. She was trying. It didn't need commentary. Logan and his wife arrived last, and to my surprise, they brought laughter. He pulled me aside after dinner. I implemented that rollout structure you mentioned, he said. The team pushed back at first, but it's working. Did you tell them where you got it? He grinned sheepishly. Eventually. After I let them think I was a genius for a while. I smirked. As long as it's working. He nodded, then paused. You've really got it together. I don't think I ever told you that. No, you didn't. Well, I'm saying it now. Across the room, I saw my father examining the small row of medals on my shelf. His eyes paused over one in particular, my cyber defense citation for countering a foreign breach that nearly paralyzed 2 federal networks. I read about that, he murmured. Didn't realize you were leading it. I was. He didn't say anything else. He just nodded, eyes thoughtful. It wasn't a parade. It wasn't a Hollywood ending. It was better. It was real. Later, over pie and coffee, my father raised his glass in a small but deliberate toast. To Colonel Juliet Dane, he said, who proved that worth isn't found in following someone else's path, but in walking your own. We all raised our glasses. I looked around the room and saw something I had never seen growing up. Not pity, not politeness, recognition. And in that moment, I realized something powerful, something that had been waiting for me beneath every disappointment, every dismissal, every quiet night spent doubting my place in the world. The victory wasn't that they finally saw me. The victory was that I had become someone worth seeing, long before they ever looked. You'd think recognition would heal it all. That once your father finally looks at you with something like pride, once your brother stops talking over you, once your mother bakes you the pie she never made when you were homesick at boot camp. That maybe, just maybe, something clicks back into place. But it doesn't. Not really. Because underneath the handshakes and toast glasses and borrowed warmth of newly awkward family dinners, there's a quiet ache no amount of praise can smother. I had spent years chasing their respect like it was the only currency that could validate my worth. And the cruel irony was this. By the time they offered it, I no longer needed it. Not the way I used to, and still it hurt. A week after that dinner, I found myself staring at an old voicemail on my phone. It was from years ago. I'd saved it without knowing why. My father's voice, stern and dismissive. You can't build a future in uniform, Juliet. One day you'll realize that. We all do. I remembered where I was when he left it. Kandahar, 112 degrees in a cramped tent with a cyber rig buzzing nonstop beside me. I'd just come off a 19-hour stretch patching a breach we couldn't even confirm was state-sponsored yet. I was exhausted, dehydrated, and I'd still smiled when I saw the call. I had played that voicemail 3 times before deleting his number. Now I listened again. Not out of spite, out of mourning. Not for the pain he caused, for the version of me that still needed him not to cause it. I saw them more now, my family. They made the effort, and I let them. But I could feel the strain of years still suspended between us, like tension wires humming beneath the floor. Sometimes it showed in small ways. The way my father still hesitated before saying "Colonel," as if it stuck in his throat. The way my mother sometimes asked if I was ready to settle down now, like my entire life had just been a detour around a proper future. The way Logan sometimes looked at me mid-conversation, as if wondering when I had become someone with the power to overrule him. They were trying, but trying doesn't erase absence. Trying doesn't undo birthdays missed because I was stationed overseas. Trying doesn't unsay the word wasted that hung in my father's voice every time I turned down a desk job. One evening, I got a call from a former team lead. She'd served under me during a particularly brutal digital siege 2 years earlier. An invisible war of ones and zeros that almost compromised a dozen government networks. Her voice was shaky. Her husband had left. Her family didn't understand. She said, "Colonel, I just wanted to hear from someone who knows what it costs to choose this life." I didn't know what to say at first. Then I did. "I know exactly what it costs," I told her, "and exactly what it's worth." I hung up and sat in the dark for a long time. This life, the one I'd built, this identity I'd carved with sweat and silence and steel, it was not built to be seen, it was built to endure. To hold ground no one else knew was under siege. And the heartbreak was not that my family didn't recognize me sooner. The heartbreak was that they couldn't. Not until the world forced them to. A few days later, I visited home again. My father was in the garage, rummaging through old boxes. When he saw me, he wiped his hands on a rag and said, "Found some of your stuff. Thought you might want it." He handed me a small bin. Inside were old photos, some letters, a few medals I'd mailed, and assumed they'd thrown away. One was bent. Another was still sealed in its envelope. I held them like foreign objects. "You never opened this?" I asked. He looked away. Didn't know what to do with it at the time. I nodded, the ache rising again, not loud but sharp. "I sent this after my first deployment. I was scared. I thought maybe you'd be proud." He didn't speak. The silence wasn't hostile, just empty. That night I sat on the edge of my old bed again, that quilt still draped across it, like a relic of girlhood. And I cried. Not because I was weak, but because even strength needs space to bleed. I cried for the girl who thought a uniform could earn love. I cried for the woman who had to walk into a boardroom with rank pinned to her chest just to be heard by the people who gave her a last name. And I cried because I realized that no number of medals, no military title, no perfect speech in front of a glass-walled conference room would ever fill the hollow where unconditional love was supposed to live. But when the tears dried, I didn't feel empty. I felt clear. I stood and looked in the mirror across the room. My eyes were tired, my shoulders firm. I wasn't a soldier looking for approval anymore. I was a woman who had survived herself. And that kind of strength doesn't need a headline. There's a strange kind of freedom in letting go of the apology that never comes. It doesn't happen with fireworks. No climactic showdown. No grand epiphany over dinner. Liberation, as I came to understand it, was quieter than rage, subtler than heartbreak. It arrived on a Tuesday, in the middle of an ordinary briefing, when I realized I hadn't thought about my father's approval in weeks. I was too busy living the life I built without it. Project Sentinel was entering Phase 3, and I was waist-deep in protocol revisions, liaison meetings, and emergency simulations. My days were long, purposeful. My team respected me. My superiors trusted me. My decisions carried weight across departments I once dreamed of entering. I didn't have time to chase validation. Not anymore. And somewhere in the rhythm of all that responsibility, the emotional thread that had bound me to the need for recognition just snapped. One day, I passed by a framed photo in my office, me standing beside General Armstrong, shaking hands after the successful defense integration test. It had been up for months, but this time I actually paused to look at it. Really look. I saw the fatigue in my shoulders, the pride in my stance, the shadow of something deeper in my eyes. Ownership. This is mine. Not given, not gifted. Built. I stopped updating my family as regularly, not to punish them, but because I realized I didn't need their permission to be proud of myself. When my mother texted about Logan's upcoming award banquet, I responded kindly, but I didn't offer to attend. I didn't feel obligated to clap from the crowd anymore. When my father called to ask if I'd reviewed the latest Westbridge proposal, I kept it professional, neutral, measured. He was trying, more now than ever, but I no longer mistook effort for accountability. And when Logan sent me a draft of his white paper, asking for my thoughts as both a sibling and someone who clearly knows what she's doing, I read it without resentment. I even sent him notes. Because liberation doesn't mean becoming cold, it means becoming untouchable in the places where you were once bleeding. I started mentoring junior officers again, something I hadn't made time for in years. One of them, a young woman named Daniels, reminded me of myself 10 years ago. Too sharp, too quiet, constantly underestimated. She asked me once during a coffee break, "Ma'am, do you think it ever gets easier?" I took a long sip and looked out the window. The Pentagon's shadow cut across the parking lot like a line drawn in conviction. "It doesn't get easier," I said, "but you get so strong they stop trying to break you." She smiled. "I hope I get there someday." I smiled back. "You will. Just don't wait for anyone to give you permission." That night I went home and dug out my old journals, half-filled notebooks from deployments, late-night reflections, furious scribbles from years when I felt invisible. One entry stopped me cold. "I wish they could see me. I wish I was enough." I closed the notebook and exhaled. Because I was enough. Not because they finally saw me, but because I had never stopped becoming. Every long night, every missed call, every ignored email had shaped me, not shattered me. That was the truth they could never take from me. The next morning, I walked into a classified roundtable briefing at Fort Meade. 10 men, 2 women, 1 colonel, me. No one questioned my seat at the head. No one interrupted when I spoke. And as I delivered a threat projection strategy that would become the basis of our next cyber defense shift, I didn't once think about who wasn't clapping. Because I no longer needed an audience. Later that week, I received an envelope in my inbox. Thick cardstock, formal seal. It was an invitation to speak at a national defense summit. Keynote slot. A letter from the Secretary of Defense himself. He'd seen my Sentinel reports. He wanted my story, my voice. I sat with that for a long time. Not because I doubted I deserved it, but because for the first time in my life, the voice I'd worked so hard to amplify finally echoed on its own. Healing didn't look like a big speech or some miraculous family reunion. It looked like me, alone on a Sunday morning, making coffee in my kitchen, humming a song I used to love before the military ever taught me how to pack emotion into neat steel compartments. The apartment was still. No boots on tile. No radio chatter in the background. Just sunlight spilling across my counter and the quiet hum of a woman who had stopped apologizing for how much space she took up. I had become someone I never imagined. Respected, yes. Decorated, yes. But most importantly, at peace. That didn't mean there weren't days when the old ache returned, or moments when I saw a proud father and daughter at a cafe and had to swallow something hard in my throat. But the weight had changed. It no longer pressed down. It simply reminded. When the defense summit finally arrived, I stood backstage in full uniform, smoothing the front of my jacket, more out of habit than nerves. I glanced down at the podium card with my name in bold. Colonel Juliet Dane. Not Logan's sister. Not the one who left. Not the one who wasted her future. Just me. The woman who built her own name, forged from every insult she never shouted back at, every tear she dried alone, every decision she made when no one clapped. I stepped into the light. The room was filled with the kinds of people who once doubted me. The types who still underestimated young women until we held their budgets and their security clearances in our hands. I spoke not with fury, but with clarity. I told them about cyber strategy, about digital warfare, about building defense systems that outlasted leadership changes and ego. And then I told them a story, not the one about my promotions or medals, but the one about the day I sat across from my own family and said nothing while they talked over me, thinking I was still just a girl with no direction. And how the next morning, I walked into their boardroom and quietly dismantled every narrative they'd ever told themselves about who I was. Not to shame them, but to show what truth sounds like when you finally say it without flinching. After the speech, a young cadet came up to me. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hands trembling. "Colonel," she said, her voice breaking, "I didn't think I could do this. My family doesn't support me. They think I'm wasting my time." I reached out and took her hand, steady and firm. "You're not wasting anything," I said. "You're building something they don't have the eyes to see yet." She cried. I let her. Because I knew that cry. I had lived that cry. Months passed. Promotions came, more speeches, more boardrooms. But the most important change happened quietly. I stopped needing people to believe in me first in order to believe in myself. My family still reached out more often. My mother sometimes sent me articles now, ones she actually read. My father sent me a photo of a plaque he had placed on his office wall, in honor of Colonel Juliet Dane, U.S. Army Cyber Command. And Logan, he started calling just to ask questions. About leadership, about pressure, about how to hold your ground without bulldozing someone else's. I gave him what I could, and when I couldn't, I said so. Because healing, I had learned, also meant boundaries. One afternoon, I stood in front of the mirror before another formal event. I stared at the woman staring back, hair neat, metals polished, eyes soft but unshakable. I placed my hand gently over my heart and whispered something no one had ever said to me growing up. "You did it. You were always enough." Not because they said it, not because I won, but because I never stopped showing up for myself. Quietly, completely, relentlessly. That is healing, not waiting for others to catch up to your worth. But walking forward anyway,